Someone tampered with the Gospels, not because they hated Jesus, because they loved him. But when they wrote down his words, their own fears still left marks on the page. That's a dangerous thought to carry. Let's talk about why. Sometimes when you read the old scriptures, you find two different gods in there. One says one thing and the other just flips it on its head. I'm not here to say every difficult line from the past is somehow fake. I'm not here to prove some secret plan or conspiracy. So ask a better question. When those old texts pull you in two directions, I always just look at what Jesus did. The records show Jesus at a family meal telling the disciples, "No food can make you unclean." And yet later, Luke wrote that the old laws, every single one, would stand forever. The early stories were clear. He told his closest friends, "Don't go to the people of other countries." Then at the very end, after everything, he told them, "Go to every country in the world."
Same Jesus. Different rules.
Yes. And that for you shouldn't scare you. But if it does scare you, I understand. It can feel deeply confusing looking at these differences. So carry one test with you tonight. When the stories in the book tell you different things, don't just listen to the arguments. Look at him. See how he treated everyone he met. The very first thing that shifted with him was about food. What we ate and what made you unclean. Food rules sound small today, but they were the very walls of that world. The text described Jesus during those synagogue readings, where clean and unclean defined everything for our people. The scribes and teachers truly believed these rules were direct orders from God himself. They believed that avoiding certain foods was the only way to truly please him. The scribes would say it often, quoting Luke, that not even a tiny mark of the old law would vanish because of Jesus. Not a single stroke of the pen, they insisted. All those old rules about food, for instance, meant to stand forever, they believed. But then, looking at the text, Jesus' message was shifting. In the book of Mark, he completely overturned the old food laws. He was absolutely clear. It's not what goes into your body that makes you unclean.
To say that back then, that must have been shocking.
It was a bombshell. When he said it, to tell people it didn't matter to God if they ate pork or didn't eat pork. That it made no difference at all how close you could get to the Father. That was truly shocking. But that ancient human habit, that drawing lines, it wasn't just about animals. That idea of clean and unclean always jumped from a plate to a person. Jesus grew up in a world where some people were just unclean. The stories show him watching the Roman soldiers at the market, foreigners, Gentiles. We saw them as unclean because of what they ate. The sick, those with leprosy, they were called unclean too. Beggars, prostitutes, anyone down on their luck, also called unclean humans. Always left outside the wall. Jesus didn't just teach that no animal was truly unclean. He took that truth even further. He showed us there is no such thing as an unclean child of God. A sick man, a leper, walked straight toward Jesus. And right there in front of everyone, Jesus reached out his hand. The account is clear. He reaches out and he touches the man's arm.
And people must have been shocked.
They were terrified. But he was quietly breaking old tribal laws with nothing but kindness and love. Even the people who walked with Jesus every day, who spread his message, they still wrestled. still clung to those old tribal ideas of who was clean and who was not. Years later, Peter had a vision, a sheet dropping from heaven, covered in animals his tradition called unclean. A voice told him to eat. Long before that, Jesus shared bread with people others called unclean. Peter still refused the vision's command. And later in Antioch, Peter struggled to eat at the same table as the Gentile believers he was converting, the very people he was bringing to the Father. He still saw them as unclean. He was wrestling with a picture of God Jesus had spent his life correcting.
He was still clinging to that old boundary wall.
Yes. But Paul, who had truly grasped what Jesus taught, was absolutely furious. He confronted Peter directly, face to face. He said Peter was not living what Jesus had taught.
So that split, it just never really went away in those first communities.
It did. He always seemed to ignore those lines. The ones about clean and unclean people. The scribes had so many rules carefully written down to keep people far from God and far from each other. But Jesus? His hands reached across every single one of those lines, pulling everyone closer. The other question that kept coming up, the one that weighed heavy on so many, was who God had chosen, who really belonged. The leaders of our people held on to one powerful idea, that our tribe, our nation, was chosen by God. They told us we were special, but that kind of special came with a heavy cost. It was everywhere. Even as a boy, listening in synagogue, Jesus heard as they talked about our own tribes, how God supposedly loved us more than anyone else. Even the nations around us, even the mighty Romans, believed their gods picked them above all people. Just look at Alexander the Great. People truly thought the gods had blessed him, which is why he became king of Egypt. This idea of God picking sides, it shaped everything. It gave our people a way to understand the world. And it was why our young men marched off to war, believing the Father was on their side against his other children.
So Jesus really had to change that whole way of thinking, didn't he?
He did. And it stuns me, even now, how hard it was for anyone to grasp. Deep down, we all want to be the favorite. But a God who picks favorites, who chooses one people above all others, that is not the God of real love and mercy. Matthew, he catches a turning point. Just that one idea that changes everything. It makes you look at all the things people believed they had to do to earn God's favor. All the prayers, all the offerings.
Explain that. What happens if there are no favorites?
Imagine a world where you never have to compete for God's love, where he truly loves every one of his children equally. Because there is nothing you can do to earn more of it, and nothing you can ever do to lose it. You see, what he taught, it changes everything you thought you knew about God. Not just the rules we grew up with, the old laws our ancestors followed, but even those newer faiths that still tell you to earn God's love through rituals and endless rule following. Jesus never turned anyone away, not if they needed comfort. He saw the spark in everyone, even an enemy, like that Roman soldier, an occupier, whose faith he praised. Or the woman from Canaan begging for her child's healing, and he gave it. He came for all of us, not just one people. I often think about the woman at the well. She was a Samaritan, an outsider in her own land. She felt the shame of being lesser because of her choices, because of the judgment she carried. Jesus sat there just talking to her. And her question was simple, but it was the one everyone had. Where do we worship God? Here on this mountain or in Jerusalem? That day he gave the only answer that truly matters. He told them God wasn't found only in Jerusalem, and not just in those hills.
He turned the whole religious order upside down.
He did. Like no one before him and no one after him. What set Jesus apart was how his simple message of love took root in so many so quickly. They were willing to die rather than let go of that message of pure love.
Is that why Paul and Marcion mattered?
Yes, Paul understood what Jesus was saying. He wrote that with Jesus, there was no longer us and them, no Jew or Gentile, no slave or free. A man named Marcion, years later, felt that truth so strongly he tried to build his own scripture around it. Paul never told anyone the old rules just needed a fresh coat of paint. He said we were released from them all. Now we serve in a new way, the way of the very breath inside us.
So it wasn't that he taught no morals?
Not lawless, no. He showed us a new center. It was love, then mercy, and grace. Even loving your enemies. The old laws, the ones carved in stone, they simply weren't the highest truth anymore.
And Marcion built his Bible around that?
He did. Marcion, you see, was the one who made the very first list of books for what he called a Christian Bible. He chose only one gospel, the one very much like the book you now call Luke, and 10 of Paul's letters. Everything else? He threw it out. All the old writings, gone. He understood that Jesus' teaching was a completely new start, a true departure.
But why Luke?
You know, sometimes what seems obvious isn't. Luke, the one who wrote one of the good news stories, he wasn't among the 12 Jesus chose. The church leaders who came after, they had to explain that. Their answer was always, he was close to Paul. And yes, it was a close companion who wrote the good news that carried Paul's teachings.
So Luke had a defense. Just not the same defense as Matthew or John.
Yes. Sometimes we make the story bigger than it truly was. Luke was always seen as Paul's friend, not one of the first who led us.
And Marcion thought the church had changed the gospel of Luke?
Yes. He was convinced the church had slipped in new lines just to keep the old rules going, but others saw it completely differently. They said he was the one cutting things out, the parts he just didn't agree with.
So what is the honest line?
Both sides swore the other had changed Jesus' message. That is the honest line. Don't try to make it any smaller than it was, or make it bigger than it needs to be. He saw the cracks, but the path he offered, it felt too narrow. The question itself, that wasn't his to invent.
That question. It cost him, didn't it?
It did. He was thrown out, cast aside. The way he saw things, his own reply, it felt so strict and confining. But the deep question in his heart, that was honest. The church never got a perfect book sent down from heaven. What they received were living memories, scared groups of people, sharp, hard fights, writings that still show all those cracks. We explored two big ideas tonight, didn't we? The arguments at the family table echo in the texts about who was clean enough to sit with God, and the quiet way Jesus would listen when someone said God was only for our people. He showed us in those stories exactly who he was. He touched the leper, no hesitation. He saw something noble in the Roman soldier. He brought peace to the Canaanite girl. He sat with the Samaritan woman and told her, God lives inside.
When the words on the page seem to contradict each other, just remember what Jesus showed us.
Just look at what Jesus did. Paul, who came much later, understood it. He put it simply, I died to the old law. A man named Marcion, he looked at these two pictures of God, one full of fire, one full of grace, and he gave a very blunt answer. Jesus, barely 12, in synagogue, his face would tighten as they read about God's fury. He just listened. The church later, their only answer was to just stitch on more books. But that tear, that deep disagreement, it was still there. You don't have to keep pretending the two pictures are the same. You can choose the path of love Jesus walked. Think about this.
Why does that keep happening?
Something in us just keeps pulling away from the God who is pure love. A true father loves all his children, the good ones and the ones who stumble. But human fear, it wants a tribal God. A God who demands endless rules and perfect obedience just to prove you belong.
If you can truly see how Jesus was separate from all of that, the relief is immense.
Yes. Don't carry the burden of those who tell you God's love has rules. God loves you already. You are a part of God, and He is a part of you.
How do we awaken that piece of God inside us?
What they called the Spirit then. That deep well inside us. To truly awaken it, you have to connect with love, pure and simple. By the market, sitting with a woman everyone else avoided. He just listened and loved, with no judgment at all. He even loved the thief crucified next to him. He even loved Judas, the one who turned him in. Jesus asked him to do it. Because his time, his 3 years of teaching, it was complete. And the message of love had already reached thousands, all across Jerusalem and the lands nearby. If you feel confused, breathe. The God Jesus knew was too vast for our old ideas. His love reaches everyone. Jesus does not bless your side. He blesses the enemy.